Okay, so our partnership with University of Hawaii CTAHR, a lot of folks working there. They've been instrumental in our response to Coffee Leaf for us. They've been very active partners, very responsive with us. Also as it relates to the pesticide applications and extension and the permitting for those pesticides. So we thank you, University of Hawaii, and please join me in a warm welcome to Andrea Kawabata, our extension agent. Andrea, please join me on stage. Thank you.
All right. Sorry, still not quite as bright as we would love it to be on the screen, but hopefully it's a little better than earlier. Again, I'm Andrea Kawabata, and I'm an extension agent working with the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources with their Cooperative Extension Service. And I'm located in Kainaliu, and I also have here with me Matt Miyahira. He is an educational support for my program. And I also wanted to introduce to you guys, and I hope he's around, Roshan Manandar. Is Roshan here? Oh, there he is. He's an extension agent on Kauai that also works with coffee. So today I'm going to go through some of the research and extension activities that took place in 2021 and 2022, and some of the research that will be happening this season. So let's see. There we go. Okay, so outline for today's presentation, we'll go through the needs assessment industry survey and CLR survey that took place earlier this year. We'll go through some of the pesticide trials coming out of the IR4 program, as well as other researchers, tissue culture that's taking place at this time out of the university, repellents and biocontrol for CVB, and one of our extension agents who works with ag business and finance has a few slides on inflation, coffee, and how it affects coffee industries here. I'll talk about some of the projects that have been taking place on Kauai through Roshan's program, and then some of our work at the Kona station on the Catamore Mocha hybrids that we have at the station, as well as some of the plant propagation that we're working on with the CLR-resistant plants. I've got my notes here so I don't have to turn around. All right, so before I begin, I wanted to thank and acknowledge all of our funding agencies that support the research as well as the extension that we're able to conduct throughout the state and to help you guys with your needs. I also want to thank our volunteers and collaborators that have stood by us throughout these years and throughout these hard times, so that we could do the outreach and research that helps to make a bigger impact for your industry. So I'll start off with the industry needs assessment survey and CLR survey that went out at the end of 2021, and we had it available for feedback for a few months. We didn't get as many responses as we were hoping for, but we did get 128 responses for this survey. Most of that coming from Big Island farmers and those involved in the industry, and then the remainder coming from Maui, Oahu, and Kauai. So most of these were farm owners or farm lessees, and about 62% of the respondents farmed on 5 acres or less, just to kind of give you a little bit of demographics there. 14% of the farms were certified organic, with most farms under an acre of coffee. So a majority of the respondents were also estate farmers and those who sold cherry to processors, and the survey was also completely translated into Spanish. All right. So, to try and get an idea of the sustainability and profitability of farms, a question was asked about their estimated harvested ripe cherry yields per acre. And so respondents said that, most of them, 60% of these farms harvested 4,000 pounds or less cherry per acre in the 2020-2021 season. And so a follow-up question to that was how their cherry yields compared to years prior. And 48% of the respondents said that their yields decreased a little to a lot compared to the previous 3 to 5 years. And it's a little concerning to me. You know, I mean, these are low numbers for yields per acre. And as you can see from the chart, there are farms that are going 10,000, and even more than 10,000 pounds of cherry per acre. So it's attainable. So why aren't these farms at these higher levels of yield? And, you know, looking at the data, I really couldn't tease out any of the specific reasons for this yield drop, but observationally, when I go to farms, what I see are a lot of older trees that have not been replaced over the years, farmers needing to address their fertilization issues, so poor fertilization, and then also damage from coffee root knot nematode over the years. One of the other questions, and there were quite a few questions, so I tried to just pull out some of the more important ones that I thought, you know, impacted the industry a bit more in providing the information during this conference. So one of the other questions was how farmers saw their main field challenges and how serious these problems were to them. And so their answers included pest and disease, which included, of course, coffee leaf rust, coffee berry borer, and black twig borer, tree decline and or death, and then issues related to farm labor. So on this slide, when I was looking through some of the data and going through some of the coffee leaf rust specific data, some of the things that stuck out to me were some of the differences in responses for farms that seemingly last season were able to control their leaf rust under 5% for infection as well as severity. And then versus those who were having a much more difficult time having greater than 26% infection and severity. And these are the numbers coming from them, you know, so these are the farm's estimates. And so, let's see. That's under 5% on a farm and then over 26%. So I'll go through this list. And with the lower rates, farmers were more likely to have destroyed CLR infected materials than farms that had the higher rates. They were also more likely, the farms with higher rates were more likely in need of pruning overstory trees and trees surrounding their coffee fields, so they were in need of opening up the canopies, getting more sunlight into the trees, and then reducing some of that humidity and moisture that's surrounding their coffee. Farmers with lower CLR rates were more likely to have submitted soil and leaf tissue samples to help with the fertilization practices. They were also more likely to increase or modify their fertilization program, and then also more likely to spray an HDOA approved fungicide. And when I looked at some of the data of the farms that were struggling, 20% of those in this higher category of infection and severity did not even spray a fungicide on their farm. So those with lower CLR rates also continued or increased their participation in their farm and increased their awareness of what was going on in the farm versus those with higher CLR, and considered that time spent to be as the same as years prior for those who had higher infection rates. If farmers thought that they were managing CLR at a level that kept their farm operational, they did have lower levels of CLR. When asked if their farm was operational with what they were doing for CLR control, they said yes, or they weren't sure. I mean, this is our first year with CLR, so many of them were still unsure. But when that same question was asked to farmers who were struggling with CLR, no one in there said that they were operating at a sustainable level, and many of them were also unsure. So one of the other questions that were asked was what kind of coffee-related research that they wanted to see. And some of the more common answers were coffee leaf rust-resistant trees and varieties, CBB, CLR, and other coffee pest and disease management, organic controls, and systemic fungicides. So I'll go into the research side of what's happening at CTAHR, and this is the IR4 program. So these slides are from Julie Coughlin, and she's given me some notes on what to say, so hence the notes up here too. So the IR4 program is a federally funded program that helps specialty crop farmers with their pest control needs. Hawaii's program is a 3-person team, Dr. Chang, who's the program leader, Julie Coughlin, who's their researcher in the field and state liaison representative, and then they also have James Cam, who's also a field researcher. So some of the trials that they conducted in Kona in 2021 were to test the efficacy of fungicide products to control CLR. 7 products were tested: Quadris Extra, Apruvia Top, Preaxorzemium, Approach Prima, Dithane, Pyraziflumid, and Excalia. These fungicide products were applied to separate replicated plots following the proposed rates, number of applications, and intervals recommended by the registrants for each product. And they also measured disease incidence and severity before the first application, and then subsequently about 30 days for a period of 5.5 months. These plots were also evaluated for phytotoxicity and crop safety, and they wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to cause any damage and stunting of the trees. So the plots were evaluated pre-treatment on May 3rd of 2021, and at that point there weren't any differences between the rust treatments and the controls. The first application was made to all treated plots on May 5th as a preventative spray, and then that's when disease levels were very low in the field. The disease incidence remained below 5% for all of the treatments until late August, while rust in the untreated plots, that top blue line, increased significantly. By September and October, rust incidence started to increase above 5% in all of the treated plots, except Excalia and Quadris Extra. So these plots had late season applications in August, while the other plots received late applications between May and June. CLR severity was low throughout the trial period, and rust severity followed the same trend as rust incidence. So as rust incidence increased, severity also increased. No crop damage was observed in any of the fungicide treatments, and in summary, all of the fungicides tested were safe to the coffee crop and provided effective control of CLR for approximately 4 months following the first spray application. And she still suggests that a strategic rotation of systemic fungicides with copper and biopesticides have the potential to provide season-long control of CLR in well-managed coffee farms, and a sound IPM program will be essential for managing rust resistance. So this year, they're planning on trialing the second year of these fungicide testings for coffee leaf rust. The products that they're going to be trialing are Pyraziflumid, Excalia, Alto, and Abound. They'll also be field testing for anthracnose, and including 2 trials that are ongoing in Hawaii as well as in Puerto Rico. The field trials are planned to test the performance of an herbicide, GF3206, and this is a new alternative for broad-spectrum weed control that has very favorable environmental and toxicological profiles. And the IR4 program would like to thank Full Moon Farms as well as Kona Hills for their support in providing the field sites in Kona. And they also wanted to thank the Kona Extension and Research Station faculty and staff for their assistance with logistics in Kona. And for more information about their IR4 project, please check out their websites. All right, so this is Dr. Chang, and he has a coffee leaf rust field trial with other fungicides that are going to be funded by the SCRI grant. And his trials are also taking place at Kona Hills and are concurrent with the IR4 program fungicide trials. So these trees were stumped in February of this year. And so as new shoots emerge, they'll be sprayed with a contact fungicide first to protect the new growth. And then when the verticals are large enough, the fungicide trial will begin around late June, early July. And his team will be testing for CLR control, which includes azoxystrobin, an organic systemic product, 3 conventional systemic products, and a bacterial biocontrol called Pseudomonas chlororhynchus. And he'll be collecting data on the number of infected leaves per branch, the number of CLR lesions and spots per leaf, and the percentage of leaf surface infected by CLR. All right, next up is Dr. Michael Shintaku. He's actually our county administrator on the Big Island, and he came to us from Hilo and is now at CTAHR. And he's a pathologist who is going to be working on tissue culture of coffee leaf rust varieties under the same SCRI grant. And so he will be researching micropropagative techniques for these resistant varieties, and his goals are going to be to establish coffee in vitro in preparation for large-scale micropropagation, setting up a bioreactor facility to increase the number of plantlets available, and then producing these coffee leaf rust resistant clones and acclimatizing these plants for ex vitro propagation. So his team currently have several coffee varieties in culture already, from leaf materials taken from leaf rust resistant trees. And these photos on the left show the embryonic callus formation on these leaf explants. And these were put into culture in February 24 of this year. So as you can see, these calli formations is just step 3 of about an 11-step process or so. And this process can take up to about 2 years from the start to when plants are coming out of the nursery. So it's not something that's going to be really speedy, but it is a great start towards trying to get rust-resistant plants en masse to the industry. Okay, so this is Mark Wright, Dr. Mark Wright. He's an entomologist in the PEPS department of CTAHR, and he's continuing his work with a CBB repellent and a biocontrol agent. So Dr. Wright's team is testing a pine beetle repellent pheromone called verbenone, and he's had this testing going for a few years at Waialua Estate Coffee. And he also uses a splat delivery system which slowly emits the active ingredient at a controlled rate for a couple of weeks for up to 6 months. So his preliminary trials have showed that it repelled CBB and had the potential to reduce infestation by about 50%. And this technique could be used in a push-pull strategy that would include CBB traps as well. So this coming year, let's see, he is going to be continuing his research under an experimental use permit from Hawaii Department of Agriculture. Since flowering was late on Oahu, his trials will begin soon, and he is hopeful to have verbenone registered towards the end of this coffee season. Other research that he's been working on is with Dr. Peter Follett of USDA PBARC, and they've been working on a biocontrol for CBB called Phimastachus coffea. And it's a tiny parasitic wasp that originates in Africa and is found throughout Latin America. This short-lived wasp will lay 2 eggs in a CBB adult, and then the wasp's progeny emerges from the CBB, as shown in this photo. And so this wasp is actually very specific with its hosts, and they've done the testing to make sure that it does not affect native species of beetles. So applications to release Phimastachus in Hawaii are under review with USDA APHIS as well as HTOA, and the researchers are hopeful for a positive response later this year. So I'll move on to the extension side, and this is Shannon Sand. She is an extension agent working in ag, business, and finance. And she wanted to share a little bit about inflation and how it affects Hawaii's coffee producers. So this graph shows that in the past 12 months, inflation has been increasing among the major categories, including food, non-food items, and energy. And energy has had the greatest increase of about 32%. And overall, in March 2022, inflation has reached 8.5%, which has been the highest rate of inflation in 40 years. And this has caused major changes in the purchasing power by consumers. This graph shows an increasing trend among the producer price index for roasted coffee in the US. And this family of indexes measures the average change over time in prices received by producers for domestically produced goods, services, and construction. So according to this graph, US coffee producers are receiving some of the highest prices for roasted coffee in the last 50 years, although we do see that we got high prices around 2012, 2013 as well. So these PPIs measure price change from the perspective of the seller. And this contrasts with other measures such as the Consumer Price Index, which measures price change from the purchaser's perspective. So what does this mean for Hawaii coffee producers? It likely means that an increase in input prices are going to occur, and most of you are probably already aware of it and being affected by that. So what can producers do? Producers can review their budgets and farm records to better understand their options to minimizing costs while maximizing revenue and profits. Producers can also compare their farm benchmarks, their farm to benchmarks set by high quality, high yielding, and sustainable profitable farms. Producers can also attempt to decrease input costs where possible and in ways that product quality are not jeopardized. And they can also consider adding value to their product to increase revenue and profitability. I should have pulled Roshan up to do his own slides, but I'll do them. So Roshan Manandar, he is an assistant extension agent for invasive species management. And as I said earlier, he's located on Kauai and has been working with the Hawaii Department of Agriculture as well as the Kauai Invasive Species Committee to survey CBB in farms that include Moloa'a Bay Coffee Farm. They are conducting visual surveys as well as an inspection of CBB traps, and they've actually found that the visual surveys are easier and faster to conduct than monitoring the traps. He's also working with Dr. Kunhui Wang of CTAHR to survey for coffee root knot nematode on Kauai, and so far they have not found this nematode on commercial farms on that island. He continues to coordinate the CBB and CLR response planning monthly meetings between CTAHR, HDOA, and KISC. And Roshan and I have also been working with KISC to create these rack cards which aim at educating backyard growers as well as the general public. So here in Kona, myself, Matt, and Nick, who is our station foreman and manager, we've been conducting outreach and maintaining coffee projects at the station, including germplasm and a small plot of Catamore mocha hybrids that are resistant to coffee leaf rust. And these Catamore mocha hybrids actually have been at our station probably for about 40 years. And so, you know, just having this kind of germplasm is really important to the industry, but we just never knew, we always hear Catamore doesn't cup well. So we never knew if it was anything that could be released to the industry, because we know that cupping is also, you know, is of high priority when we're looking at CLR-resistant varieties. So this past season, I took a look at these trees. Luckily, Nick had taken care of them to the point where at least one vertical was still remaining, and that vertical was producing coffee. So last season, I harvested cherry from 18 of these 20 individual trees. We have 10 different selections of Catamore mocha hybrids, Sarchamore hybrids, and a T867 Costa Rica 95 hybrid. And they're all showing to be CLR resistant. So every 2 weeks I harvested from these trees, weighed the coffee, hand pulped the cherry, fermented, sun-dried, and then vacuum sealed the parchment so that we could do a cupping to determine if it was even worth moving on with. And so these harvests took place between September 2021 and January of this year. And so on March 15, thank you to Greenwell Farms. Tommy had us there for this cupping. And we cupped 4 of the different hybrids. And we were joined by Q-grade cuppers, Chai and Jennifer of Greenwell Farms, Brittany and Madeline of Pacific Coffee Research, and Dr. Tracy Matsumoto of USA PBAR. So thank you all for being there to do this cupping with us. And Tommy and Chai, they hauled the coffee, hand sorted, and roasted the coffee for us. And then Chai also helped us to collate the results and the coffee descriptors from the score sheets. So really appreciate the time and effort they took to help us with this cupping. Of these 4 hybrids, they were selected because of their overall yield. It was one vertical, that's all we could work with, but it still gave us an idea of yield per acre, as well as they were selected for their cherry size and the quality of their parchment. Some of the hybrids that we did harvest had a lot of floaters, so something like that was something that I considered when I selected some of these hybrids to go to cupping. And the cupping also included a Kona typica. That was from the past season's crop. So these Catamore Mocha hybrids, as well as the other hybrids, were genotyped by Dr. Dapeng Zhang. He is a USDA ARS research geneticist in Bellsville, Maryland. And so we kind of knew what they were, at least. Some maps are old, you're not super sure what they have, especially if they're coming to you as seedlings. So we were able to have them genotyped and know exactly what they are. So when you look at this chart, when we compare them to the Kona typica, trees 2, 4, and 6 are actually dwarfs with green leaf tips. And then tree 15 is also a dwarf, but it had bronze leaf tips. So phenologically, they were a little bit different from each other as well. And compared to an average cherry weight of coffee from grafted Kona typica trees grown at our research station, we selected these hybrids based on their at least average to larger sized berries compared to these typicas. In addition, the trees had medium to relatively high yield, of course, based on this single vertical, but that's all we had to go with. And also, one of the most exciting parts of this, knowing that Catamores don't normally cup well, you can see from the cup scores that all these Catamore hybrids exceeded the 80-point minimum for specialty coffee. And our tree number 4 actually scored an 84, and all 3 of the Catamore Mocha hybrids outscored the typica that was on the table as well. So it's really promising. We don't know how long these trees are still going to be resistant to CLR. With any kind of mutations and resistance, its resistance could be damaged. So we still do spray these trees with the fungicides, even though they are showing resistance in our field, just so that we don't create any kind of resistance and those trees become resistant to CLR. So this season, I plan to monitor these trees for continued resistance to rust, and then also, again, harvest from these trees and take data on cherry yields, cherry size, and hopefully have another cupping. So not all these trees produced cherry last season. Some of them also didn't produce enough to get any kind of real good data. So I'm wondering if there are also other trees in this field that we'll be able to consider for the cupping. And we're currently working to replicate some of these trees. Like this tree 4, we only have one single tree of this hybrid, so we're trying to replicate them so we don't lose the genetics. And in doing so, I've been working on trying to figure out, okay, well, how do you graft these trees, and what's the best way that we can get the greatest success with grafting? And so we are grafting onto Liberica rootstock to tolerate coffee root knot nematode, which we have throughout the Big Island. And what I've found is, on that left side picture, grafting using the suckers that come up from the stump, I can get those grafts onto younger Fukunaga liberica rootstocks than if I took scion tips from older productive verticals. So using these younger verticals that are coming from the stump, it allowed me to start grafting sooner onto the rootstock plants. When we graft, we use a splice graft. It's one of the simplest methods of grafting and requires just 2 cuts diagonally, one on the scion and one on the rootstock. We do use parafilm to wrap the scion so it doesn't dry out, and we have not had to put it under a mist chamber because of the parafilm. And I use electrical tape to fuse the rootstock and the scion together. So some of these, I'm just telling you what I'm doing, if in case you want to try it at home, you can understand what we've been doing at the station. One of the most important aspects of grafting onto a rootstock, though, was to retain at least 2 leaves on the rootstock and not removing all leaves from that rootstock and then grafting onto that. So I think you can kind of see in the second as well as the third photos there, the leaves on the liberica rootstock still remain with the graft on top. And on the fourth picture, those are some successfully grafted trees with the Catamore mocha tops and liberica rootstocks on the bottom. And I brought some plants. They'll be in the next room over at our table. So if you want to take a look at the grafts, the graft unions, please join us at their table there. So this year, Stuart, Shannon, Matt, and I, we've added to the Kona Extension YouTube account. So we had already established some CBB videos on there, and we wanted to include a lot more information that was accessible to everybody for Coffee Leaf Fest. So, please visit the YouTube account to view any kind of topics that include crop insurance, the USDA disaster assistance programs, CLR monitoring and management, various presentations on fungicide products, as well as worker protection standards. And next Tuesday, we'll have Ariana Wood. Chris had mentioned her earlier. She'll be presenting on her ProBlad Verde field trial, which was conducted at the Kona Research Station last year. And if you're available to join us, please register for the Zoom. And we'll have a pre-recorded presentation at 3, and then the live Q&A session at 3:30 on May 24. Also, Roseanne Leiner is co-hosting the final 2 talk story sessions that will include CBB and CLR researchers, and that's taking place on May 26th and June 2nd, so please register for that event, which will be held online as well. All right, so some of our future trainings include what's necessary, like WPS, pesticide safety, but also some of the ideas and topics that have come from you guys, both from our event evaluations as well as from the coffee industry survey. So we're hopeful that a lot of these different topics will be presented in the future trainings that we host and co-host. And one of our next ones, please save the date, on June 4, we'll be having a coffee desuckering field day at the Kona Research Station. And so Jensen and Rosemary have really been integral partners in some of these events, especially the sprayer calibration field days. Rosemary has been able to translate some of these workshops and field days to Spanish for us. And we have a lot of information on sprayer calibration. Calculating pesticide rates and knowing the amount of pesticide to include per gallon of water, is really important. And because we didn't use a lot of pesticides in the past on coffee, it's something relatively new to farmers. So I also created a field guide that will help to make it a little bit easier for folks in the field to make these calculations based on your pesticide rate per acre, how many acres of coffee you have, how much water you're using per acre. And come and see us at the table. We can give that to you for free, and we would love your feedback on some of these tools that we're creating from Extension. So kind of lastly, I wanted to encourage you to visit the hawaiicoffeeed.com website. We have a lot of information there. That's where I host CBB, CLR events, and all that kind of information at this website. And so if you hover over the Coffee Leaf Rust tab, it'll take you down to all the different publications and information that we have available, presentations, subsidy program information on there, compatibility for Bavaria products. And then if you kind of click on one of the tabs, let's say the spraying for CLR, it'll pull up additional tabs for publications that have been translated to Spanish, Ilocano, Tagalog, the sprayer calibration, pre-axer information, and probe-lab information. So there's a ton of information on this website, and I encourage you guys to please take a look at it when you have time. And with that, I'm going to finish up by thanking everybody, for your support and your funding, your encouragement, and your collaborations. I really appreciate everybody here. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you to HCA for having us up here and being able to present this information from our research and extension faculty. If you have any questions pertaining to the specific projects, everybody's contact information is up there. Otherwise, you're always welcome to contact me. Give me a call, text, email, and I'll help you get that information that you're requesting. Thank you. You guys have time for questions? Does anybody have any questions? So are you talking about the IR4 pesticide trials? Yeah, so I guess the question was that even in the control, CLR incidence and severity was quite high, let's say 60-70%. If that other 20-30% meant that it was resistant, no. So they're testing it on trees that are very susceptible to coffee leaf rust, and that chart was showing incidence and or severity of coffee leaf rust on the leaf. So there are parts of the leaf that aren't going to be affected by coffee leaf rust, but the leaf itself, the tree, the plant is affected by coffee leaf rust, and it is not resistant to CLR. Yeah. If it was resistant, you typically do not see the lesions forming on the leaves. You might see attempts, but then you won't see any kind of sporulation. You won't see the spores on the underside of the leaves on resistant trees. So the incidence and severity would be 0 if it was a resistant tree. Yeah. So I guess the question was, what's going to be the best option for growers? And it includes a cost-benefit analysis, which I don't know, but in I guess transitioning over to resistant varieties, or what have you. And The best option, I can't tell you what the best option is. You know, some growers are going to want to keep their typica, keep their susceptible varieties on their farm. Some growers are going to want to get these resistant varieties and replant. The varieties may not be available in mass to the industry, so it might be a slower replant. Some growers may already have plants that are showing resistance. So, you know, with the grafting that I was showing you, that's something that could be done on a farm already if they do have resistant varieties that they want to keep the genetics pure on the plants that they're going to be grafting the scion onto. Remember that when you do open pollinated seedlings, there are chances that the seedlings that you plant, even though they're from resistant varieties, could have crossed from other non-resistant varieties, and you know those trees could be either susceptible or be reduced in the resistance. So I can't really answer you, Miles, on what's going to be the best option. That has to be an individual decision. You have to look at your financial obligations to your farm as well, what you can afford, and what materials are going to be out there for the farmers. Right now, really, there's no commercial availability of the resistant varieties right now, so grafting is a way to slowly change over a farm if a farmer does have resistant varieties. Currently, tissue culture is going to be the way to go in trying to replicate resistant varieties in large quantities for the industry. That's where, I guess, somebody with an economic background would have to look at the cost benefit of the different options on transitioning a farm to resistant varieties. The reason why we graft onto Liberica is because of the coffee root knot nematode. And so that's something that could be done in the farm. And because the leaves look so different on Liberica versus Arabica coffees, you can tell what is the rootstock and what is the scion growing. So, you know, if you already have grafted trees, there's a potential for field grafting, and I believe somebody was going to be showing field grafting here or demonstrating it. And so you've already got your rootstock in the field. You could potentially graft on resistant varieties onto that rootstock and continue your farming with these resistant varieties. So I can't answer you with a direct answer, I'm sorry. That's going to have to be looked into. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. Chris, still 5, till 6? You good? Am I done? Yeah? Next presenter? Thank you. I'll be around. So if you guys have any other questions, just let me know.